I'm not sure where I was in this book, but I'm going to bring this chapter today. I want it to come out and sit here and have my coffee and just give you guys a reading. Now, this chapter here is called The Entrance of Evil. And as we know, Isaiah 45:7 is so clear on that God created evil. Now, God's great plan and its broad outline could not be considered without becoming obliged to include the crisis introduced by Satan the adversary. In view of such a well-thought-out plan and such thorough preparation indeed, with the definite determination of the consummation, the question arises: how was it possible that a single creature could bring about such a staggering crisis, which would continue throughout the eons, after God had placed all into the hands of his Son, the Christ, and he became responsible for it? It is not of so much moment whether all entrusted to him by God would be saved, but rather whether at the close he would be forced to a shameful confession before the Father that a great part had been lost through the machinations of Satan. This failure would actually be a fact if the doctrine of eternal damnation or eternal torment were true and were in accord with the Scriptures. Here we stand before one of the most serious of all problems, and we cannot evade it, for the honor of both Father and Son are at stake. Satan created in the Son. Question whether the entrance of sin into paradise could not have been hindered is far too late in time. We must consider it long before at Satan's beginning, when he was still in God, or in his Son. He also was included in the great transfer of all out of God into the Son, and created in him. Satan was. Even at that time, this mighty one was definitely designated. In the catalogue of all that were created in the Son, we find sovereignties and authorities. Here's a clear indication of Satan, for he is the chief of the authority or jurisdiction of the air, Ephesians 2:2, and the jurisdiction of darkness, Colossians 1:13. This, of course, also includes the celestial beings who were not involved in his apostasy. Along with all other creatures, Satan, as such, was modeled as he later came into conscious existence. God it was who made him beforehand, and exactly as he was, to be in his later life. The Son, in his supreme place as God's image and likeness, was then already Satan's head, and the latter was fully subject to him. When the counterworker or adversary was still unconscious, he was recognized by Christ. In the days of his humiliation, Jesus perceived from the beginning who it was to give him up. John chapter 6:64. How much more must he have known in the glory which he had before the world was, with the Father? John chapter 17 verse 5, that he carried in himself the deadly enemy who would later lead him to the cross. How easily could he have eliminated this tendency from Satan before the adversary himself knew anything about it? And now, how is it possible that this celestial creature, notwithstanding his inferior position, could out of his own mind, that is, out of himself, originate the opposition of God, cast off the headship of God and his Son, take up the warfare against Christ, alienate many of his creatures from him, and radically alter God's entire plan? Yes, and with all this, how could he force God and his Son into conflict against their will, that they will never be able to end? What almighty power would he need to have? One who could engage in such a battle with God would be fully the equal of God himself, if not his superior. When one of two contestants was fully at the mercy of the other at the beginning, yet was able, by means of wiles and artifices, to free himself and deliver blows which damaged his opponent beyond recovery, and was then able to reduce the latter's success to a minimum, then he really deserves admiration. The other, however, a severe censure, because he allowed his inferior opponent to do so much damage. It is a pity that a tradition has crept into the sects of Christendom which actually teach just such an outcome of the work of Christ. He is represented as impotent, because he has not succeeded in carrying out the Father's plan according to his will. God is supposed to be like a man who turned over his business to his son too early, and because of his unfitness, brought it so near bankruptcy that both father and son had to struggle to save what was left. According to orthodoxy, it looks like this in God's creation. Because the Son could not hinder the interference of Satan, he had to come down to earth in order to rescue some of the great number who were lost. Could it not be said that in such a case it would have been better had the Father kept the creation in his own hands? Of what use were all the thorough preparations and definite determinations if these could not be attained? Should we seek to explain this failure by saying that God foreknew all this, yet was compelled to do so in order to preserve the freedom of the creature, we still could not help asking if God, in his wisdom, could not have found some other way, which would demand the eternal damnation of many of his creatures. As he must have known about this, it looks like malicious indiscretion. But the teaching of the Scriptures, God be thanked, is essentially different. It does not teach eternal torment. It teaches that God has created both good and evil. For the contrast, God has created everything through the Son, including Satan, on purpose, to bring about this contrast, to teach his creatures, to bring them into loving communion with himself, the Father, so that all can be reconciled back to God, that he may be all in all. And through this experience and this wicked eon, which is soon coming to an end, thank God, that we may see that God is sovereign over his creation. No such thing as free willy. So, grace and peace. Have a beautiful Tuesday. And I will see you the next time I do a reading.